Last week, I asked the question, what if anime had only 60 seconds to catch your interest? And that's the question I'm going to pose to an additional 13 anime from the Winter 2021 season today. As with the last batch, I'll only be looking at new shows, not continuations, and I'll be skipping any opening songs to make sure I evaluate 1 minute of the actual show. So with that said, let's get into the shows. First up this time is Tenchi Souzou Design-bu, or Heaven's Design Team. It presents a fun comedic premise. What if God outsourced making animals to a design team of angels? The opening was exposition through narration, which I'm not a huge fan of usually, but the fact that it began with the twist on a familiar biblical passage was unique. In addition, the animal creation boardroom is packed with eye-catching character designs. It's also really fun to hear the voice of Albedo from Overlord playing an angel, and we've got the voice of Itadori Yuji from Jujutsu Kaisen as a new hire, so the voice cast seems great already. I've been in the mood for another good scientific comedy after Science Fell in Love, so I hope this one stays entertaining. The next show I took a look at is Byoui Ramune, or Dr. Ramune, Mysterious Disease Specialist. This is another show that started with narration of the premise, though it didn't do it in as creative of a way as Heaven's Design Team. I feel like in this case we could have skipped right to the end of the first minute, where a girl begins crying mayonnaise. I think that would have been a fantastic cold open, and would establish the existence of mysterious diseases without us having to be told about it. That said, the bizarreness of the mayonnaise tears makes me want to see more. This show got me interested just before the 1 minute expired. There's some nice violin and cello music too, which I appreciate. Third on the list is Back Arrow. I had high hopes from the first few seconds, as what appeared to be a missile streaked down toward an idyllic medieval-looking town. Then the show immediately dragged us out from this cool scene by launching into a spiel about the world and its political composition. Instead of being introduced to a big world I don't care about yet, I'd rather meet characters to catch my interest and then find out how they fit in the larger world. Since I'm judging the show purely by the first minute, I think the vast majority of that minute was wasted on boring jargon rather than things that would catch viewers' interest. In general, this show might be a neat premise aesthetically if there's a blend of past and futuristic technology, but I'm not super inclined to watch more at this point. Next up is Hortensia Saga. I enjoyed the orchestral music at the start, and I liked that we started in the middle of an action scene without exposition. A guy transforms into a werewolf and kills the king in front of a young girl, possibly the princess. There's also a red-haired anime swordsman that made me jokingly say, "Is that Roy from Fire Emblem?" I later found out his name actually is Roy, so I expect Nintendo's cease and desist is already in the mail. There wasn't anything objectionable or especially artful about the first minute of this show, but the voice cast seemed strong, and it caught my interest enough to give it a full episode. That said, this is a video game adaptation, so I won't hold my breath that it will be good in general. Next, we'll switch over to Vlad Love, which interestingly premiered on YouTube in December and won't continue until February. I thought the initial helicopter shots looked a bit goofy and was wondering if this was going to be 3D animation, but I was relieved to find out that wasn't the case. The show is actually a collaboration between Production IG and Studio Drive, and I like the art style after the first few seconds, as well as some of the unorthodox ways the show put multiple panels on screen at once. There's also an interesting contrast between the police raid that uncovers a doll in a shipping container before the opening, and the character walking down the street after. I didn't see anything that particularly caught my attention, but the aesthetics are enough for me to give it at least a full episode. Next up is Skate Leading Stars. Since the production studio is JC Staff, I braced for the possibility of Shokugeki level animation, but this wasn't as bad. There was some decent movement, but when you compare it to Mappa's work on Yuri on Ice, at least from the clips I've seen, it falls short by a lot. In terms of positives, I think the voice acting of the red-haired skater was strong, and the sound effects of the ice skates were pretty on point. That said, as I mentioned in my last video, I'm not a big fan of sports anime, so they really have to go above and beyond in order to get my attention. This show unfortunately didn't have anything in the first minute that I thought was especially eye-catching, and the character designs weren't anything special. The next show I watched the first minute of was Project Scarred Praeter no Kizu, or Scar on the Praeter. This show is 3D animation, and while it's certainly not as offensively bad looking as X-Arm, it doesn't look great either. There are some laughable fire animations about halfway through the first minute, and in general, I feel like I'm watching a cheap video game cutscene. The narration talking about the special ward forsaken by the country wasn't particularly interesting either. The only eye-catching thing we see is a character using some kind of power to stop bullets, but that's been done too many times to be enough to draw me in. You have to do bullet stopping cooler than the Matrix did for me to be impressed, and this did not. That said, I do want to make it clear that I'm not against fully 3D shows in general. There are some that are impressive. Sadly, the vast majority still look unnatural. I then switched over to Idoly Pride. I've never watched an idol show before, but considering I've fallen down the Hololive rabbit hole during the past year, I'm not opposed to starting one. In the first minute of this show, we see the manager giving a speech before a concert, after which he addresses a dizzying number of girls who all respond back. It's a lot of names front-loaded onto me that I definitely will immediately forget, and this takes up the entire minute, so there's not a lot to evaluate. The character designs are decently varied, though there aren't any that really stood out to me. What I did like was the range of voices, as each girl just said hi, but each one had a very different tone that expressed their personality. I also took a look at the voice cast, and pretty much all of these girls are complete unknowns. While the show didn't overly impress me in the first minute, I probably wouldn't mind giving it a shot if I have the time. Next up is Soko Musume Senki, or LBX Girls. Apparently this is an isekai show, but none of those elements made an appearance in the first minute. The first 60 seconds is just two girls talking to each other about various places in Tokyo. There's nothing wrong with that, and I actually thought hearing about some of the locations they were mentioning was kind of interesting. The problem was that I was too distracted by the animation, or lack thereof, to really get into it. I'm not sure if this is just the first minute or if it continues, but it seems like Studio A-Cat was doing everything they could to avoid animating. There was almost no movement in the first minute except for mouths and 2 brief shots of walking. Everything else was stills. That doesn't give me much confidence in the show going forward. After that, I looked at Gek Idol. I honestly don't have too much to say about this one, as relatively little happens during the first minute. A girl gets a letter, and then there's the start of what appears to be a stage performance using projections of idols. Nothing particularly stood out to me in terms of art, music, or voice acting. Let me know if this show ends up being any good, though. The next anime on the list is Wave Surfing Yappe. There seems to be a decently handled mix of 2D and 3D animation here, and the waves look pretty nice. While surfing isn't something I'd typically be into, I am a bit intrigued by the character designs here. The first guy has the face of a cocky anime rival, and I was totally unprepared to see the words Wizard of the Waifu board for the second. I've seen waifu cutting boards and ironing boards before, but a surfboard is new territory. Just for that, I'd give this show at least one full episode. The second to last anime is I-Chu, halfway through the idol, and it's a male idol show. I'll say off the bat that these idols have a lot more distinct character designs than the girls from the other two shows I looked at least in terms of the head. Their outfits are relatively the same though. The show starts out with the guys moving toward a packed arena, but then it transitions to a few of them performing in a subway, which I imagine must be in the past. The singer's nervous voice, combined with microphone feedback and a tacky sign, was an interesting contrast from the stage. That said, I don't think this show did anything special that would draw me into a genre that I wouldn't normally watch. And last up is Idols. Wow, there are a lot of idol anime this season. Or maybe there are every season and I just haven't noticed. I don't know if this one even really counts, as the episodes are only 8 minutes long, but I was actually pleasantly surprised. My knee-jerk reaction was, aw man, more 3D animation? And while it doesn't look great, it has a strange charm to it. I think the reason I like it is because it's reminiscent of some of the animated Hololive skits. The interactions between the girls are very cute, and the voice acting is strong. I also like the premise of an idol group that doesn't have any fans. Plus, there's a strange talking head statue for some reason, so I have no clue where this show is going. Also, I have to admit I cheated and watched the opening song too because I didn't realize it was an opening rather than just a shot of a performance. It's really catchy, and the animation is a lot more fluid in it than in the rest of the show. I think due to the shortness of these episodes and how fun the show has been so far, I'd actually watch it. Between this video and the last video, that's pretty much everything from the season that's not a continuation. Overall, I think the shows in the last episode were a lot more impressive during the first minute, but there were some surprises here. What shows are you most impressed with so far this season? I'd love to know your opinions. I'm Matrix from Matrix A&M, Anime, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as it will help me out a lot as I try to grow the channel. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.